Hello, everybody. I hope that you've been enjoying the conference so far. So I'll introduce myself. My name is Jaz Purawal. I'm based here in the UK. And I actually ran my own analog astronaut mission last year. I built a geodesic dome and did this here in the UK during the pandemic. And it was actually through interviewing Sian that I got to know her. And we had a little interview in our dome. And I asked her lots of questions about what it was like to be an analog astronaut. And so that's how I got to know her. So I don't think Sian needs a lot of introduction, but Sian, if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little bit about yourself first, just giving us a short intro.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Sian Proctor, and I'm an analog astronaut. I'm an explorer. I am a astronaut. Actually, I need to cross analog off, but I'm so used to saying that. I've been chasing space pretty much my entire life. I was born on the island of Guam because my family was there for the Apollo missions. My dad worked at the NASA tracking station there. And I was born 8.5 months after Neil Armstrong took those famous first steps on the moon. So I consider myself to be a moon celebration baby. And I grew up with NASA memorabilia to my dad on his office wall and dreaming about being a fighter pilot, transitioning into the astronaut corps. And, things change. And that dream kind of died when I was a teenager. And I went off and I became a geoscientist. I've been a geologist and a professor at South Mountain Community College, part of the Maricopa Community College District for over 20 years now. And so I've really enjoyed being a professor and sharing my love of science and exploration, and especially as a geologist or a geoscientist, being able to travel and teach around the world and explore our beautiful planet. But then in my late 30s, something magical happened where a friend said, "Hey, NASA's looking for astronauts, you should apply." And I was like, "What? How do they select astronauts? Let me see about this." And so I went and I looked at the requirements and I met most of them. So I applied and I ended up being a finalist for the 2009 NASA astronaut selection process. That really rekindled my love of aviation and aerospace. And from there, I became an analog astronaut. And that really changed my life when I got to live in the high seas habitat for 4 months, investigating food strategies for long duration space flight. So it was funded by NASA. Being part of that mission, the very first crew to ever live in the high seas habitat, was really cool because it was an international crew, but we got to go to the Mars Desert Research Station for 2 weeks to see whether or not, do we get along and all that stuff before going in for 4 months. So I actually did MDRS first, then high seas. Then I went to Lonaris up in Pila, Poland, and did that for 2 weeks. And then I came back to high seas back in January of 2020, just before COVID took over, for the first all-female Mars simulation or mission. And so I have had a lot of experience as an analog astronaut, and now I get to slice analog off or put a line through it, and we can talk about that some later on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to talk to you about that. But let's just go back to the analog experiences for a little bit first. So, you've done literally all the analogs over the span of how many years have you been doing that now for?
Well, I went to the high seas habitat in 2013. And so 8 years.
Gosh, so 8 years, that's amazing. And during those 8 years, do you know how many missions you will have accomplished or how many weeks that totals?
So that would be with 4 months. Actually, it would be 5 months, 2 weeks, if my math is correct, that I've been an analog astronaut in a decade. That 4 months at the high seas was really interesting because we were the very first to live in the high seas habitat. It had just gotten built. And there was a lot of little issues getting that even established. And so when we moved in, you can see the photos from that. Solar panels are all on the ground and stuff. And, the systems hadn't been checked out. And, we were problem solving while also living in the habitat and running all of the research and stuff. We knew we kind of had to get it right, or there wouldn't be further funding down the road. And so luckily we all got along, and we made it out successfully.
Yeah, I mean, 4 months with the same crew. You don't have to go into any detailed sort of stories, but there must have been some difficulties aside from obviously the physical difficulties, the fact that this was a completely new environment and a brand new habitat. The crew dynamics, like you said, you first went to MDRS to try and establish crew dynamics. Like, can you talk a little bit about what it's like to spend 4 months with the same people in a confined environment?
You learn a lot about each other, and it's really interesting because there's the honeymoon phase, and I always say you after living for 4 months with people, two weeks is nothing. If you're breaking down in 2 weeks, there's something else going on there. But after, the research is showing anywhere between 6 and 8 months, you really start to see some big conflicts, because conflicts going to arise. It's just how you can deal with it as a crew. And I think that that's where these analogs really come in, is being able to look at the dynamics of bringing different people from different backgrounds and different, countries and all of that stuff together, and putting them in a stressful environment for a long period of time, and letting, you can mitigate conflict and give them skills and see whether or not they're successful or not. But for us, we were investigating food strategies for long duration spaceflight. Crew cohesion was kind of there, but it wasn't the focus. And, by the end, there were some cracks that were starting to appear, but nothing major that totally derailed us. Had we been in for another couple of months, who knows, all kinds of things can happen the longer you're in. But again, that's what we're learning. And then how do you prepare a crew before they even go in so that they can mitigate these kinds of things?
So just kind of going back to the beginning, like, what was your personal motivation for taking part in an analog?
I always wanted to go to space camp when I was a kid. I thought this was like space camp for adults. I always wanted to be an astronaut, wanted to go to space camp, wanted to experience all of these things. And so when this came up, I thought, oh, well, I just missed becoming a NASA astronaut. I can go and be an analog astronaut and live in this Mars simulation. And I like cooking. And so that kind of fit in really well with who I am too. And I thought, food, Mars, simulation, Hawaii, 4 months? Okay, sign me up. But I love the idea of contributing to human spaceflight while being here on Earth, having my normal regular job as a geologist, geoscientist, but being able to have this experience and see whether or not I'm a good crewmate. Do they want to kick me out of the hab? Okay, every week, who's out? But really just thinking about how we can use our unique space to inspire those within our reach and beyond.
I love that. And that's, inspiration is what you've been providing, certainly since I've known you, for me personally, and a lot of other people. But just to touch on some of the food research you did there, I'd be very interested just to hear a little bit about that before we kind of move on to some more other work you've been up to.
Meals for Mars. So one of the things that's interesting is when they put out the call for this analog high seas, they said, they wanted us to know, well, what would we do? What would our research? And they told us that we were going to be investigating food strategies for long duration spaceflight. So I put in not as a geologist, I put in as a science communicator. And I said that I had a lot of skill in, doing that kind of work. And I thought, okay, well, they need, will they pick me if I put in as a, science communicator, the education outreach person? Because when I applied for NASA, I was really trying to be selected as a educator in space. And so when I was thinking about becoming the analog astronaut, it was still in that same lens of, okay, how do I, be the educator? And when they had this food, strategies for long duration spaceflight, I thought, oh, well, how better way to reach people than through food? We could run a recipe contest and I could, I had a lot of video editing skills and videography. And I was like, well, I'll just run a Meals for Mars cooking show while I'm in the habitat for 4 months, but we'll use recipes from people out there. Let the public send us recipes. So I set up this whole contest and had, about 75 people submit recipes. And then whittled that down to 25 in each category. And then I either cooked by myself or I cooked with a different crew member every time it was my turn to creatively cook. And we shot this video series.
Oh, wow. That actually sounds amazing. And I think that makes you a very popular member of the crew, the one who's doing all the cooking for everybody, right?
Yes. And that's the thing about when we think about food and a culture of food and why that matters, because think of all of the celebrations and stories and experiences you've had around the table and how that leads to crew bonding and cohesion, because you get to know each other really personally when you're sitting there sharing a meal, particularly if it's a meal you cooked and it has some cultural or significance for yourself. So an example was Jahaira, who grew up in Puerto Rico, and her sharing her Puerto Rican flavors and dishes with us. And then we had our commander Angelo, who's Belgian, and he had his own flair. And then Oleg, who lived in Russia until he was 12, introduced us to a lot of different things. And so you look at those experiences, and those are some of my most cherished memories, is the food that my crew members cooked and how they expressed their culture and their upbringing through that food.
Yeah, that's so important. And it's something I think they're very conscious of on the ISS as well. And so this is like, sitting together, eating is part of the whole team bonding. So you mentioned briefly about, in a way, were you thinking about this as kind of training for yourself for like going into space? Was this actually something you considered? Was this on your mind when you first started getting involved in analogs?
To be honest, I was 39 when I was a finalist for the NASA astronaut selection process. And to some extent, that's a little bit on the old side for NASA in the selection process. So I was more concerned that, that my time had kind of slipped me by. And then, the best that I would be able to do was really being an analog astronaut. But I always had this hope that commercial space would come along. And so I applied again in the 2013 selection process. I think I may have made the 450. And then, you apply again, and then you don't even make the highly qualified. And you're like, oh, well. So this last time, NASA put out the call for astronauts, which they're going through the selection process right now. People asked me, did I apply? And, here I was 50, and I was like, no, I think it's going to, if I get a chance to go to space, fingers crossed for commercial space. And so becoming an analog astronaut was more about being able to fulfill that childhood dream. Even though it was never going to space, I was able to still, knowing that I was contributing to the advancement of human space flight was really, important to me. And I think that that's what's really unique about becoming an analog astronaut and being basically, you're volunteering to do research for NASA or for other researchers at universities, along with doing your own research, but in the end to advance human spaceflight.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's a way of getting involved in space research and space exploration without being an astronaut. It's the way that anyone can get involved. And this was, something that obviously drew me to it as well. It's like, how can I make a contribution? And it's the beauty of analog astronauts and analog missions is that it's open to pretty much anybody, right? If you can make a contribution, you can do it through being an analog astronaut.
And that's part of when I talk about a Jedi space, a just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive space, this is what it's all about. And so when people ask me like, well, how do I become an analog astronaut, or how do I get involved? I'm like, you can build your own habitat. And so when you did, I love that. And so that was one of the reasons why I was like, who is this person? I need to go and chat with her because she's doing amazing things. But that whole idea of anyone, anywhere around the world can claim to become an analog astronaut by trying to use their unique space to advance human spaceflight and how they do it and how they share what they're learning with not only the analog astronaut community, but the broader community of our Starship Earth, right? And so I feel like it's such a great way to think about the contribution that you can do on a small scale that leads to big changes.
Absolutely, exactly. Even the smallest contribution is going to affect, like, on a grand scale potentially. Like, so
This is my I actually had this mug in high seas, and so this is my I got this made with our mission patch, which is funny because it has a fork, a fork and a spoon combined on the end there.
Oh, a spork, we call that.
Yeah, and so I had this, and this is the cup that I actually used in the habitat for those 4 months.
Oh wow! Oh, that's really cool. Very appropriate to use it now. So shall we talk briefly about how this community that we've created came to be and this conference?
Yes. So, after coming out, I'm not the one who coined analog astronaut. It was kind of out there, but I was like, oh, wow, what a great terminology for this community. And so I thought, well, a lot of people were asking me, how do I become an analog astronaut? What is that? There was no real good information out there. So I was like, well, I'll just get analogastronaut.com and I'll create this website, this simple informational website. So at least when people would Google, something would come up. And I did that, I guess maybe 5 years ago. And I kept trying to keep it update. Now it's hard to update because so much is happening around the world in the space of human spaceflight training. But there was this idea of, well, how could we bring the community together? Because there was a lot of us, and we go from, we're not necessarily loyal to one program like High Seas or MDRS, or we tend to go around. We're analog astronauts who are trying to get this experience. We might become a part of Project Possum, but then we'll go live in Lunaris, or then we'll try and go do something with Nemo, or, so how do we as a community come together? And that's when the idea of creating the conference, the annual conference, came about. And luckily, having talked to you, being able to say, hey, is this, our conversations, is this something that we can pull off? And I'm so happy that this has manifested, even though it's virtual. This idea of bringing the community together in a platform like Mighty Networks, where people can network, because that's the ultimate goal, is bringing people together so they can have conversations. Sure, we'll have keynotes and stuff like that and run this conference, but until the conference comes back next year, we really want people to use the Mighty Networks as a platform to communicate, to get together, share ideas, do your own webinar. If you got something cool going on, research, share it within the network. You're looking for people to participate in something you've got going on, or you're doing a survey, here's a place for you to share it. And that's what I hope this becomes.
Exactly. That was it. Your vision of it, I just completely got straight away. And it's exactly like you said, from someone like myself who is relative compared to you, certainly very new to this, having this one place where everybody can get together, and that's it, right? It's your network. It's not our network. It's not our community. It's everybody's.
Right. This absolutely belongs to the community. I want the analog astronaut community to shape it and to share and decide, however they want to use the platform. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted it to be free and open, where people could join and become engaged in this space, and be able to talk to people like Michaela, who's the director of High Seas, and be like, hey, because people kept asking me, how do I go to High Seas? Oh, well, here's Michaela. Well, now take me out. Just go join the network, and then you can, talk to her directly and say, how do I, apply, and those kinds of things.
Absolutely. So I have to ask you now, we've got this beautiful, these pictures behind you, beautiful backdrop. You have to talk to me or tell us a little bit about this artwork that I'm looking at, because it's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, and so it's kind of interesting the transitions that we have and the creativity that we try to express. First of all, here's my analog astronaut spacesuit that I was able to pick up and bring the high seas. So I really love this, the idea of being able to try different things in these, analog missions and what type of research that you want to do. But I started doing my first dabbling into art and poetry, from a space standpoint, was actually in the high seas habitat back in 2013. And so I drew my very first Afronaut kind of painting there. And I did a set of poetry where I challenged myself that I would try all the different poetic forms while in high seas. And so over the 4 months, I did that. And then when I got out of high seas, didn't do it again. Something about confined space brings out the artist in me. And so going into COVID and not being able to travel, which was, my number one hobby, I was like, what do I do? What do I do? And so I was sending postcards to people on Instagram and on Twitter that I had bought. And someone said, well, where's your postcard? Where's your original art? And I was like, oh, I'm not an artist. And I thought, or am I? And so I thought, I can't draw, but maybe I could do collage art. So I started doing some collage art with stickers and cutouts and stuff like that. And people loved it. So then I thought, well, maybe I'll draw my own little Afronauts, and got some stencils and started doing that kind of stuff. And people loved that. And then I thought, well, maybe, I'm like, dang it, maybe I'm a good painter and I don't even know it. And so I got watercolor and I started doing watercolor paintings and people loved that. And then I took a drawing class because I'm like, okay, this might be a thing. So at the beginning of this year, I signed up for a class through the community college because the Maricopa Community College District is one of the largest in the US. And so you can take a class on anything. And so I signed up for a poetry class and I signed up for a drawing class, an intro to drawing. And we had this, one of our first assignments was called Confident Lines. And, he made us draw circles and squiggles and stuff and do it confidently. And so I thought, well, why don't I make it into an actual drawing of something instead of just squiggly lines, everything. And that's how this style was born for me. And people were like, whoa, that's so cool. And so I'm like, oh, this is great. And so I became a space artist and poet. I had my Patreon where you actually have helped support me, where I was sending postcards to people through that, where I would put my art on one side and a poem on the other and send it out to people, around the world.
That's it. I mean, like you said, I saw I think it was that picture on the right-hand side. Sorry, your left-hand side. I do apologize.
Was it this
one of those early ones? And like you say, and then you sort of adapted your style. And I loved those collage prints that you had, where that red one above near your head, absolutely stunning. But then it was this line art that I was just like, I've never seen anything like it before. It was just this unique style.
Yeah, and it literally rose from taking this class. And so this is kind of a signature piece, because this one actually went down to the Marianas Trench with Richard Garriott, astronaut, in second generation astronaut. And he signed it, and it went down to the bottom of the Marianas Trench. And so I thought, this is going full circle to being born on Guam. And I thought, oh, how could I, represent the trench, the big subduction zone and the mountains and stuff, but also this kind of idea of Gaia and Mother Earth and just what does that mean? And then I wrote a poem called Seeker on the back. And now, it's funny because when I sent this to him, I sent him this bundle of postcards. And I said, hey, will you also take these down too? Because I would love to send these to Blue Origin, because they have a postcard in space program. So then my art will have gone to space. And it's funny because he just sent this back recently. And then I had a conversation with him and he's like, you can take your art to space yourself. Did you know? Did you know before you sent it that, you were going? And I was like, no, I didn't know. I had no idea that I would be selected for Inspiration 4, but now I can take my artwork with me.
Yeah.
And it will be, one of the most well-traveled piece of art, and I will donate it to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital when it comes back to be auctioned off.
That is fantastic. I mean, that is just, like you say, the full circle of it all. I remember we had a conversation about where you were discussing this, it'll go down to the Mariana Trench and then it will be up in, I'll be able to take it to space one day maybe. And then here you are. Like, it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. It was just mind-blowing and incredible. But like, the beauty of it is this your passion, this art. I mean, this is partially, and the poetry is responsible for tell us how this helped you actually get into space on this.
I have been an analog astronaut. I've been an explorer. I'm a geoscientist. I would have thought that would have been really my ticket to space, but it's so interesting that it's my art and poetry. So when the contest came up for Inspiration 4, and they had the 4 pillars, the leadership pillar, which Jared occupies, then the hope pillar, which Haley occupies, and then these other 2 pillars of generosity and prosperity. Well, when they announced this contest, I didn't even realize the prosperity seat existed. And friends of mine sent me the generosity seat and said, hey, you should apply. This is available. Wouldn't it be great if you won? And I was like, wow, I would love to give to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital because it's an amazing organization. I have it here on it's one of our patches. Nice. And win a chance to space, sure. And then about halfway through the contest, I saw on Twitter, luckily I'm on Twitter, and I saw a video, one of my friends' videos, and I was like, what is this prosperity seat? There's another seat. How do I win this? And then I noticed that the rules were you got to open up a Shift 4 shop and show your entrepreneurial spirit, and then create a video of why they should select you. And people kept asking me for my artwork, but I was only providing it through Patreon. And a lot of people don't want to sign up for a monthly kind of subscription thing. So, and I kept saying, well, I don't have any outlet right now. And I thought, wow, this is the perfect opportunity for me to open up my art studio shop. And then I can create this video. And I really debated about what the video should be. And then one day in the middle of the night, it hit me to write a poem. And I was like, oh, and I got up and I wrote this poem out. And I was like, this really expresses what I'm all about. And so I shot the poem. It was the contest ended on Sunday night at like midnight. And this is Thursday night. And I published it to Twitter. And then I rallied my Twitter peeps. And thank you, Twitter peeps, because in 3 days, it got 70,000 views. And that was enough for me to get noticed, and then I ultimately got selected.
Just incredible. Like, it's the story of literally you're just following your passion, and I saw that video, like I'm sure most of our audience saw that video. The passion comes through, the inspiration, like the appropriately named Inspiration 4. You are absolutely worthy of that seat. Since I've known you, you've been inspiring me throughout, and just I couldn't. And like I think many people have said, it couldn't have happened to a nicer person. So like, we're all as a community excited for you. I mean, how do you feel right now?
I feel so lucky and fortunate. And one of the things that is important to me is to be able to, bring the community along with me and to inspire and say, I was in your situation. I didn't know, how do I become an analog astronaut? Oh, okay, I can do this. Okay, then you become one. And you have this hope of that transitioning into going to space. And I'm 51 years old, and that dream has come true. And so the idea of don't give up, but find your passion. And your space to inspire. And when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about your unique space, the space you inhabit, your strengths and your passions and your desires and all those things. Use those and inspire those people around you and share that passion. And that's what I did. And that's how I ultimately ended up in the prosperity seat.
Exactly. Like, enjoy the journey. I mean, I remember you once saying to me that you were very, very happy, like 98% happy doing exactly what you're doing. And then this was just the icing on the cake, right? If that hadn't happened, you would have still been very happy with what you were doing. The journey is part of that, right? You never know
It's
what.
been amazing. It's been a really amazing journey. And, you know, a couple of friends have asked me, well, shoot, what are you going to do when you come back? Because you can't top going to space. And I'm like, I'm going to be a space artist. I'm like,
same thing I was doing before I went.
This is what I'm going to do, you know, and I kind of found that before Inspiration 4 came along. I found this thing that just completed my world, because I was the explorer and the geoscientist and the analog astronaut and stuff, but my ability to express myself in a really interesting creative way was still lacking. And then this came along and I was like, wow, this really helps me, you know, talk about my vision for the future, my vision for, you know, kind of Mother Earth, you know, my whole idea of Afrofuturism, and then also the poetry, to be able to share what I was thinking when I did this. It's really completed me. And now going to space is just adding to that exploration that I can draw from that narrative and be able to share that again with all of my friends and family and people who follow me.
Yeah, completely. Living vicariously through you right now. So can you share a little bit about like what you've been doing at the moment with Inspiration 4? Are you allowed to talk about some of the training that you've been doing as part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So right after the announcement, we got on a plane and headed to Pennsylvania, and we got spun up in the centrifuge, and we got to feel what it was like to do, you know, a liftoff and re-entry, and the kind of G's that we would feel. You know, these are G's that hit you in the chest, so they're kind of different than if you're flying in a fighter jet where it drains you down to your legs. This one is straight on into your chest, and so it kind of compresses your breathing as you get into those higher G's. And there are techniques that you can use to mitigate that. So that was a lot of fun to do that. And then one of the reasons why I'm not here live with everybody is that I'm going to be on Mount Rainier doing a crew bonding, team building exercise. And, you know, I'm from Phoenix, so I'm really looking forward to be on top of that mountain, all nice and chilly. And so, but those are kind of the things, you know, astronauts would do as a Knowles experience, where you go out and you bond as a crew through that type of challenge. And so I'm looking forward to that. We'll do some fighter jet training. You know, the things that the NASA astronauts would do are the things that we are doing. SpaceX wants to make sure that we are more than qualified to be able to go up and on this mission. And so as a pilot, I'm going to be spending lots of weeks at SpaceX, sitting in the Crew Dragon mock-up, learning all the systems and my role. And that, again, we will be well trained for this endeavor.
No doubt, lots of training manuals as well, piles and piles of learning material. Some of them
I'm going to school. I'm going back to school, and I'm going to learn how to fly a dragon.
Wow, that's just incredible. Well, slightly unusual question, perhaps. Did you get to meet Elon Musk yet, or will you get to?
Not yet. I have not, but it's on the must-do list, you know, check that off. But I hope so. I imagine somewhere along the line, our crew will get that opportunity, which will be fantastic.
But so like this training, compared to like a normal astronaut's training, this is very compressed into a short period of time. How does that
It's
feel?
very compressed. And that's this new space model, right? What I love about SpaceX is that they're always thinking of like, well, how do we innovate? How can we do this more efficiently? How can we do this better, but also safer? And so looking at timelines and thinking, well, you know, all of this knowledge that we have about the Falcon 9 rocket and the Dragon capsule, you know, what is the real time that we need to be able to train, you know, and get people qualified to be able to go up to space. And they've got some of that data already because they're working with NASA astronauts. And so this isn't just something that they're like, you know, they've got data that they're thinking about, and they do it so systematically, and they're really thoughtful on how to move forward. And so I've been amazed and just in awe every time I go to visit SpaceX and meet all of the people. And they really love what they're doing. They've been there for a long time. And it just, I'm super excited to be a part of this history.
We're all excited that being part of this history. It's just amazing. Talk me through how many firsts you've got. You've got, what is it? One of the first ever commercial astronauts.
Yeah, the first all civilian, mission. So I'll definitely be the first Black female astronaut. Yep. Not first Black female astronaut, first Black civilian astronaut, because there hasn't been any civilian Black female astronauts yet. I believe I'll be the first Black female pilot of a spacecraft.
That's pretty cool. So that's not many people say,
having the pilot seat. And but also just thinking, I feel so fortunate because, you know, we're trying to open up this idea of this new space so that more analog astronauts can follow. And, you know, we've got Haley in her 20s, we've got Jared in his 30s, we've got Chris in his 40s, and me in my 50s. And so this whole idea of that, you're in your 50s, you can fly. Yeah. You know, you don't lose that dream of space. I mean, John Glenn went up when he was in the 70s. And so, this is giving us all that hope that we can go and we can be not just an analog astronaut on Earth, but an eventual astronaut in space.
Exactly. It's, you know, it's a wide demographic. It's the hope for lots of different people. It's for me, it's seeing someone who, you know, I can look at and think, right, you know, this is a woman, this is a woman of color, this is somebody I can like look up to and think that if she can do it, maybe there's hope for all of us, right? So
yes, and then you look at Haley, who is survived cancer,
right,
and then has a prosthesis in her leg, and she's going to space, and that's just so appropriate to have the hope seat. But in the end, that's what this is all about. It's about hope and inspiration.
Yeah. Completely agree. Can you show us anything from SpaceX? I know you've got your jumpsuit on.
This was one of the best things that I got, was that when I went to Kennedy Space Center for the announcement, it says crew.
Wow.
I'm like, oh, can I keep this? They're like, you're going to get a little bit more than just that. Okay. But I was so happy. I was like,
oh, it's amazing. It really is amazing. And like, just thank you for being here. Thank you for like sharing your experiences with us today and now. And I know you'll be on Mount Rainier. So obviously, you know, this is pre-recorded, but it's just an absolute honor for me to sit here and talk to you like this. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. And I hope everybody's really enjoying the conference. And to all of my friends who graciously said yes when I said, will you be a part of the first Analog Astronaut Conference? And, you know, there's no money or anything like that, only a thank you from me, really. And everybody just came together and said, yes, absolutely. And I'm so appreciative of that, and this community, and the great things that we're going to have done, but will continue to do, so that when commercial space opens up, we can say, hey, all these people are flight ready.